Hello everybody. So it's time to launch the first roundtable of today, which is called Good Enough in an Emergency Context, Sharing Experiences from the Field. First of all, I'd like to introduce myself. I am Jean-Guy and I work in CartONG as a web mapping product owner. And I was, for 4 years and a half, field GIS officer for MSF, flying, doing missions, which is why I am in charge of this session. And with me, we have Simon Violino, who is also GIS flying for MSF, so flying from missions to missions, but he will introduce that a little bit later. Then we have Carolyn Meyer for Humanity and Inclusions, formerly Handicap International, who is a field data manager in Lyon, sorry, and who also came back from Bangladesh, which you will see in a minute is our zone of interest for this conference. And finally, we have Roxana Nazarie. Roxana, I will let her introduce what she do in CartONG a little bit later, but she's both GIS and database officer in CartONG, and such as each of us has been deployed in Bangladesh in early 2018. So, before we jump in and before I leave the mic to them to introduce themselves and their experiences a little bit, what I would like to do, especially for those of you who were there last night at the AFD night, I would like to frame a little bit what's the context of this discussion. The idea is we have at the GONG some sessions when we have a point of entry, an approach, which is by definition conceptual, which is nice because then you can throw in all the ideas you want and then try in a second stage to find a concrete application from them. This exercise, this roundtable, tries to take the approach in the complete reverse direction. It's starting from a situation, from a very concrete case that will be described by Simon for the context and then by the two other persons for the rest. It's like taking the reality in your face, just like when you arrive in the field, and then try to bounce on that to move on to concept, which is the way we approach this exercise. Right, so I will give the mic to Simon.
Thank you. So, good morning, everyone. I'm Violino Simon. I work for MSF like GIS Flying, and I was in the beginning of the emergency crisis in Bangladesh. So first, I hope my English will be good enough for everyone to understand the presentation. So if you don't understand something, you can ask me to repeat. So since August to December 2017, an influx of refugees from Myanmar to Coxs Bazar come in Coxs Bazar district. It's around 670 people. All humanitarian world also come to support the crisis. Inter-sector coordination group, ISCG, is created to try to manage all the action in the camps. And at the beginning, the Bangladesh army organized all the dispatching of the refugees and provide materials to build latrines, water points, and shelters. So, like I said, it's the crisis. It's in Bangladesh, in the southeast, in the district of Coxs Bazar, southeast of Bangladesh, at the border Myanmar, Bangladesh. So on the right, you have the Rakhine states, where from the refugees, and on the left, the Coxs Bazar district, where go the refugees. So in red, all the red house, it's all the hosted communities where there are some refugees. In green, it's the two old refugee camps since the 20th centuries. And in pink, all the extension of the camp since the beginning of the crisis. So, like I said, since August 2017 until December, the Rohingya flux from Myanmar to Bangladesh, and are dispatched in the different camps and different hosted communities. So around the Kutupalong refugee camp, there are almost 500 people, 500 people in the same places, in places called now the mega camp. So it's quite 4 kilometer by 4 kilometer, the size of the mega camp, and it's about around 500,000 people. So for my mission, at the beginning, it was in October with MSF France. We work in the south part of the mega camp, and we start with one health center and another in plan. So it was quite like this. So here, it's a mega camp at the date of 23 October 2017. And you can see all the MSF structure in the mega camp. So you should to know in MSF, MSF are organized in section. And the north part of the camp was managed by MSF Holland, and the south part by MSF France. So MSF Holland, since the beginning of the crisis, have 2 hospitals and 3 health centers, and 4 other in plan. Jean-Guy was here to support MSF Holland since August, and was replaced by another GIS, and me, I arrived in same times to support MSF France opens activity in the 2 camps, Tasmir Nakola and Meyer. So, about the context of the field and the GIS data. At the beginning, we, in this the south part of the mega camp, we had 2 different camps. These 2 camps was distinct. Now all is merged. It's just one camp. So all along my mission, a lot of new arrival zone was created. At the beginning, before the crisis, before August, it was all jungle. So the map was empty. Just some point of boundaries and some point of interest on one camp was collected by Jean-Guy one day before, but on OpenStreetMap, HDX, we can find nothing. So the first aim of the mission, it's to make the first base map of the camps. The second aims are to provide all operational support you can do for the team. So they wanted have a tool to help their displacement in the camp and know where they are, etc. I should add the camps are really muddy, hilly, and all places in the camp are similar. So it's really difficult to have an orientation in the camp. The teams want also know about the topography of the camp, know about the growing of the camp, because it's around, I don't remember exactly, maybe 20,000 people by week, even more, comes every week. They want to know about the boundaries of the camp. They want to know about the water and sanitation situation in the camp. They want to know about the natural risk in the camps and in the districts, the floods, the cyclones, dryness, etc. So the first week was organized to go in the field, collect point of interest, and the night make the first map and update this map. In same times, I train a data collector to collect this data and let me time the next week to do other support, other maps, try to find other data, etc. So to do the data collection, we use Osmond. Because Osmond, it's an application easy to train someone. It's easy to start. You haven't to have a database strategy before start to collect. You haven't to have GIS strategy before you collect. You can adapt your data collection. You can have several kind of data collection in sometimes. And you can have a methodology of update. Secondly, with Osmond, it's a good navigation tool, and you can put quite all the data you want to use. For example, the new satellite imagery of the camp, the new contour maps of the camp, and all the base mapping we did, we can put on Osmond and give that to the team for their use in the camp, for their orientation. So this quick start with Osmond, without real strategy, real knowing about the future, was really good because we have time to do other support. It's easy to implement. You respond to the needs of orientation of the team when you provide the base mapping data, the area satellite imagery in the camp, etc. for the team. So it was really operational. I won't speak with you on the discussion of good enough about the boundaries issue in the camp, because we can speak about all the other subjects, all the other support we did, because we are in emergency and you have some good enough everywhere. So first, in the mega camp, the boundaries was organized in camps, block, and sub-block. The block and sub-block boundaries are built in function the MAGI system. So the MAGI system, it's one people, one MAGI, are responsible of several families. It's equal to several shelters, and it's equal to one sub-block. One block, it's equal to head of MAGI and several sub-blocks. And this is the sub-block boundaries, it's the little boundaries in the camp. At the beginning of the crisis, several actors use this MAGI system, but sometimes don't use the same naming. For example, WFP and the Bangladesh Army use two different block and sub-block name in the same camp. For example, you have your sub-block A1 here from Army for the dispatching, and the sub-block A1 for in another place for for the food distribution. So sometimes it was difficult to work with. At the beginning, another boundaries issue, at the beginning, the camp was distinct, and they finished by merge. This also provides some issue in when you work with the boundaries, because when you have the subblock A1 in the camp 1 and the block A1 in camp 2, but you don't know really on the field where are the border between this camp, it's really difficult to know where you are. So each time you need to investigate in the camp with the people, but most of the time they don't know really where I am, where I come from. On the border, it's really difficult to know, and you need to investigate. The last big issue is because nothing was drawn in the camp. We have just some points, give you an estimation where are located the different sub-blocks and block in the camp, but it's really difficult to work with, to work with. So at this time, MSF need these boundaries for several reasons. First, to plan a mortality survey. Second, to analyze the results of this survey. To know the area of work of the health surveillance team. So the health surveillance team in MSF in this camp, it's just health worker go to see all the shelter in one sub-blocks to check if people are healthy or not and give a report. It's just that. So we want to know the area of work of this health surveillance team. It's based on the MAGI system, so they know really well the MAGI, and the area of work should be the sub-blocks boundaries. And the last thing is to know better where come from patients with communicable diseases. So before this accumulation of needs, we weight these boundaries from other actors. It was like a rumor, but these boundaries never came. So we decide to did. For two main aspects, we decide to draw these boundaries. It's because the block and sub-block are based on the MAGI system, not the upper boundaries, the zoning, the camps, because these boundaries have changed a lot of time. But the MAGI system, and even if there are a lot of MAGI modification in this system, it's also the real organization of the camp, and it's quite fixed. The second main aspect, it's the area of MSF health surveillance team are based on the MAGI system. So normally we have the HR to draw these boundaries because they work directly in these sub-blocks. So we are in emergency, so 3 days before the mortality survey, we decide to build these boundaries, and to do that with 2 epidemiologists in the mission, the data collector and me, we decide to draw these boundaries. So we took all the device can record an itinerary, GPS, Garmin, smartphones, and with a little training of 30 minutes on how to record a track, include a little test. We sent all the health workers in the camp to record, to go all around the sub-blocks and draw the boundaries of the sub-blocks with the help of the MAGI. So at the end, they save the GPX files, put the name of the sub-blocks and the name of the MAGI responsible of the subblocks. And the last day, it was to treat all these JPEG files. So merge it, put the names of block and MAGI names in the attribute table, and convert line to polygons. And after you have your first delimitation, your first boundaries of subblocks. In the source part of the camp, at the end of my mission, it was around 310 subblocks. But when we did that, it was less. So when you have your first boundaries, your first delimitation, it's really bad. The drawing of polygon is really bad, like you can see on the map. Maybe it's dark, but you can see there are really some shape really horrible. And but you have something to work. And step by step, you can update, improve that. For example, here we see a lot of gap, lot of overlapping, but you have something to work. Step by step, you can improve that and redraw your polygon. Sometimes not because you are not sure, but you can resend someone, you can investigate on it. And it's a good base and to work. Because when you have just a dot to represent the subblocks with other dots, it's really difficult to imagine where are the subblocks. You need to know also a subblock is not physically, sometimes it's not just a beautiful polygon. Sometimes there are some shelters from a subblocks in this place, and some shelters from the same subblocks really far than the other. It wasn't so clear the position of the subblocks. So why it was good enough? We had the needs to have quickly all these boundaries, and we had, without an expensive process, because we have the HR, we had the HR, we had all the device to do. So it was good, but all the other actors, without the HR, I think it's a it's a hard job to do. The drawing is really bad, but it's a base. And you can start some analysis. You can investigate when you have some question for some blocks or other, and you can start to work really with that. And step by step, you can clean, improve all this work, and it was a good base. Even with the names changed from different actors, you can, with some comparison table, manage to work. So finally, it's a good base. So I want to finish by some questions for the next discussion. So who should do and share the camp mapping in emergency context? Because in Bangladesh, all actors did his own camp mapping. Sometimes it was shared, but not directly. But yeah, who should do the camp mapping? My second question is how to manage between collect and write data. For example, for the boundaries issue, we had weight the data almost 1 month, I think, from the rumor. I know in the north part of the camp for MSF Holland, they wait almost 1 year now because the boundaries, the subblocks boundaries never comes. And they start to redo this methodology. It's good because we are lucky in MSF, we have the health worker, so it's quite like the MAGI system, so we should able to draw easily this data with this methodology. It's not will be a good boundary at the base, really bad drawing with a lot of work to improve this data, but we can have. And my last question, it's about the responsibility when you share data. Because when you share data with a bad quality, for example, if we share these boundaries with bad drawing, what's the responsibilities? And also about the legitimacy of the organization to share this data. Maybe MSF are not really the good actors to share this data. So it will be for the discussion after. Thank you.
Thank you, Simon, for this presentation. I actually quite like one of the sentences you said at the beginning, because I think it summarizes quite well the situation when you said, we had good enough everywhere when you arrive in the camp. So the way I understand it, correct me if I'm wrong, would be that basically you had chaos in the camp on the very early stages of the emergency, and everybody was doing what they could with what they had. Which also links to the second high point I think that we should highlight from your presentation, is that at some point medical organizations such as MSF was waiting for information that didn't come, either because it was non-existing, either because it was not accessible enough, and finally had to take action outside its usual field of activity, let's say, when it comes to data creation and management, and act as an informal camp boundaries mapping corps, let's say, or organization, in order to address their own needs and their own mandate. So I think that's quite an interesting point for us to come back at the end of the presentations. And just to adopt a chronological approach, I would like to pass the mic to Carolyn, who will explain us a little bit what was happening a few months later on as a natural consequence of what was happening at the time where Simon was in the camp. Thank you.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. I don't know if... Yeah. Okay. All right. Everything's good. Thank you. Sorry. Okay, so hi. I'm Carolyn. And so like Jean-Guy was saying, I currently work at the HQ for Lyon as a field data management officer. But from January to June of this year, I was in Bangladesh as the meal manager for the Handicap mission. And I just want to go over so there's a couple of things that I want to talk about today. First of all, I'm going to talk a little bit about what we did in Coxs Bazar. Then I want to talk a little bit about the results and what happened afterwards in January and going forward in terms of coordination between actors and information management, and how these systems kind of had an impact on our capacity to intervene and what we did to manage data. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the solutions that we were able to find and how it was or was not good enough in different phases. So the timeline I'm just going to stay here if that's okay with everyone. So the timeline for our intervention in Bangladesh is HI had been in Bangladesh since 1997 with a development project. So we had bases actually all over the country and a base in Teknaf. And these were mostly low volume, personalized case management operations. So with PSS, psychosocial support and rehabilitation, and some civil society support. So data was really managed on a case-by-case basis. We're talking about paper forms, case files, everything very easily accessible and just based kind of organized by individuals knowing where to find the information. Then, obviously, in August and September, there was a small-scale emergency response that started. But this was mostly the teams from the development projects were they had to drop everything and switch to emergency response. So it's not necessarily what they were trained for. They were doing their development projects and then basically switched to doing mobile units in the field. I'll get into that a little bit later. But there was this sort of small-scale response with the field teams that we had. Then from September to through November, there was a scaling up, recruitment, emergency teams arriving, and sort of dealing with what was done from the previous couple of months. And then in November, so to make the link with sort of the information management, in November is the first time that we had anyone come to do any meal or information management in the field. So there was like a good 3 months of activities happening with no one concentrating on this. So this is something that I'd like to talk about a little bit later. And then in January is when I arrived and as a meal manager, so not even as IM, and there was no one specifically IM, and sort of developed the meal department and the IM capacity of the mission. So just quickly, the activities that we were doing in Bangladesh, inclusive education, livelihoods, distributions, which we started doing for emergency of NFI and dry food, specific needs, which are sort of one of the main cores of our interventions, so rehabilitation, PSS, basic healthcare, so with nurses and like basic wound care. Was that some protection identification? We were identifying EVIs, extremely vulnerable individuals through the UN, with the UNHCR, sorry. And then we were doing these both in the field, in the different camps that Simon presented a little bit, and also in TechNaf. So he's talking about Mega Camp in Kutamalang, but also in TechNaf. But so we had static points in health centers, and then also a hospital in Coxs Bazar town. And so yeah, sorry, the identification of EVIs. Just quickly, a little quick story to sort of talk about the information management of these activities. Just that, so I'm going to talk more about the mobile teams and what we did for that. But for the distributions, there was a lot of chaos around information management, beneficiary lists, and how this was managed. And there's a lot of times where we would be doing distributions with IOM or the WFP, and we would have at least 4 actors all on site, all collecting basic information. So the beneficiaries would like go down the line and give their name, their age, the household composition, and no one was able to, and this is like sort of one of the major problems, was at the beginning no one was able to really get beneficiary lists in advance to compile this information, to share it with other people. Everyone was just doing their own thing, which is obviously difficult. That's not important. Okay, so the mobile units, we had sort of different phases of the intervention, the mobile data collection, sorry. In the first phase, basically, which is the beginning, when in the September, October period, there was no standardized data collection. Each team member was sort of keeping a ledger or a little register of who did they see, what was the basic information. So these are the teams that you have to keep in mind where this was not their activity. They just sort of got thrown into it, and they started doing the best that they could to really be pure operational. Like they were really just they're going and doing wound care and like really dealing with the people that had just crossed over and were traumatized, lots of serious things like this, doing PFA, so psychological first aid in large groups. So very operational and very little documentation. And so then there was sort of a second phase where we had the emergency teams sort of arriving. We have more resources, people are a little bit more trained, and we standardized a sort of pack of documents that people started filling out. So there's paper forms, case files now that are starting to exist, but again, nothing, again, this is very managed on like an individual person basis, so I'm a caseworker and I know where my case files are, and I'm referring to other people in my team, but there's no database, we have very little information on a more macro scale. So basically everything was purely operational, and I guess I would say that each of these phases, I'm sort of explaining how it was tough, but at the time, each of these phases really was, I don't know if it was good enough, but it was the best that the teams could do. At this time, this was like the maximum that they were able to do given the volume and the circumstances that they encountered. Because, I mean, as Simone went into, there was, I think, a week where like 200,000 people actually crossed the border or something like this. This is one thing that I heard, I'm not entirely sure, but it was huge volumes coming in. So the third phase was finally, we started to have a database. So this is in maybe January. We started to have a database, started entering key data, but so now we have this big problem of we have 3 months of backlog data. And what do? We have donor reporting, and this is also another, something that's not unique to this crisis, but was specifically difficult, was the high level of reporting requests from not only donors, but from all of everything that came out of the ISCG becoming an actor, so the Intersector Communication Group, ISCG, which then now everyone is a sector, everything is a sector, there's 500 sectors, everyone has meetings every day. I mean, it becomes like a complete coordination nightmare. And we have to be able to report regularly all the time. And so we can't. So we have 3 months of backlog data. So the one thing that we have to figure out is, do we enter everything? Do we spend months now entering everything? Do you hire a lot of people? What do you do? So we start creating a database with some key data. And really the goal was to get to phase 4. So this is what I consider actually being the good enough system. Although, it's probably pretty high standards to start with, so we'll have to discuss about that. But to get to a phase where where all of the data collection, because we had such a high volume, that all of this data collection would be using mobile data collection. So that was the phase that we got to in June, so just before I left. And I'll talk a lot more about that after. So to go into a little bit about the actors, to sort of situate you in the actor situation. Now, so originally there were 5 registered NGOs in Coxs Bazar, MSF-CH, I won't go into it, but then by January there's hundreds. Everyone is present, and so many NGOs, and now no one can really people can't really coordinate. No one knows who's doing what. Everyone is trying to just go to these sectors, sort of figure out if zones are covered, go into that. So there's just a lot of information, and there's a lot of people to coordinate with. There are sectors forming everywhere, and there's more and more information being generated. Now we don't have the same problem that Simone had, where there was no information. Now we have too much information. Now we have too much information from too many actors that's not organized and not synthesized, I guess. Even though, there definitely are actors that could be their role and that we're working on it, but we have too much information. We also throw in the mix the confusion of the different zones between the UNHCR and IOM. So quickly, there was, I guess probably everyone knows this, but just really quickly, there's a sort of difference in the mandates between UNHCR and IOM, and there was sort of conflict, not a real conflict, so sorry to my colleagues from UNHCR and IOM, but there was sort of a clash almost between the mandates of these two organizations to know who was in charge. So the UNHCR, who had historically been in charge of the refugees, the registered refugees who were in these 2 registered camps, Kutupalong and Nayapara, in the north and in the south by Teknaf. And these were registered and managed by the UNHCR, and then with this new influx, basically, could have definitely been the UNHCR, but the Bangladesh government privileged IOM, had a better relation with IOM, decided they didn't want to declare them as refugees. not going to go into the whole thing, but the point is just that we have two UN agencies that are struggling now and are producing data and are producing organizations and have zones that are dedicated to them. So there's a map, but I don't have, but that shows like half of the camps are IOM and half of the camps are UNHCR. So the population data, the zoning, everything that we start getting, it's all sort of being split into two and it's supposed to be combined by the ISCG, which is not necessarily happening. Then we also have the strong government presence, so the government is getting in the mix constantly, which is normal, good to some extent, but asking for a lot of reporting, also producing a lot of information or wanting information and trying to use it, wanting to use it to synthesize and produce other information. So there's another actor pretty present. So you have the UNHCR, IOM, the ISCG, and the government all sort of coordinating. And so some examples, I guess, of that are just that we have the ID cards, which are, there's 4 main ones that become present. So there was a good organization in the camps in a lot of ways. We had lots of camps, like after the mapping was done, you had these Maji blocks. We could find people pretty easily. And we started to have cards produced. So the UNHCR produced a card for households, and it was GPS. There was a GPS point. The IOM also had cards. The WFP had a card. There was a government ID card. And I think that's it. So we ended up having all of these different unique ID numbers, and people had information on different family members linked to different IDs. So crossing information between organizations or trying to just pick one to use as your management, you basically couldn't, because no one had like there was no card that every single person had. So you ended up having to have like a ranking of different cards. And then there was also the government, fact that the government is involved, the fact that there's government ID cards that were biometric, and the potential implications that could have. So there's a lot of things to think about that. Population data was complicated. There was different population data all the time. Maps, the data collection tools, and the referrals is a really good example as well, because there was a referral pathway that was started by the Protection Working Group, which was led by the UNHCR. Okay. And they, sorry. And they started this group where everyone was supposed to refer using the same tool, and the tool was created by the protection group, so it didn't have WASH, for example, or some other things were missing, and then other groups worked on their referral tools. Basically, all the sectors worked on their own interagency referral tool and then gave it to everyone and said, hey, you should use our tool, and then everyone said, well, we already have our tool. Anyway, too much information. So I'm gonna go really fast now. This is just a little bit more detail of the camp, so these are maps that were produced by the ISCG. So there were good maps coming out after a while. At the top is the Kutupalong, and the bottom is Teknaf. So these are the areas that were working. So mega camp, as Simon was saying. And then we had some fun because they changed all the boundaries. So again, the boundaries that were set up with the zones, what were called now the old zones, so where it was like AA, BB, CC, ZZ, everything was different letters, now were camps, and they redesigned them to follow more logical natural boundaries. So great idea, makes perfect sense, except everything was kind of already in place, everyone was kind of already set up, we already had our zones that we had spent a lot of time working with different actors to try to figure out where are we working, who's working where, all the lines are sort of drawn there. And now they changed all the boundaries. So then we had a couple of months from like maybe, I think February to April, where different sectors and different organizations were using either the old or the new system. So you basically had to follow both all the time and be able to report on both, and for your teams, and this is one of the most difficult things, was for them to be able, they had to have both in their head all the time. And so as you were saying, everything looks the same, there's no clear boundaries, and so it was a little bit complicated. And just to show you, this is in February. These are the zones where we were working just specifically in the mega camp. And you can kind of see maybe that they don't necessarily follow the camp boundaries. So you can see that they do follow the zones, the previous boundaries, for the most part, and they don't really follow the camps. So it meant that now we basically had to either decide that we were going to change our entire intervention strategy based on new zones, new boundaries, which meant coordination with lots of other actors, or that we would just not be able to give not be able to share data and information and reporting with the sectors and the actors in the way that they wanted. So we couldn't organize it in the same manner that they were expecting. So sort of to just summarize some of the very big problems that we had were really high volumes of data. So this was a big change. We had huge volumes of beneficiary data, as opposed to just a couple a day where you can follow case by case. Now we had hundreds and hundreds of cases a day. The previous management system, which was just really personalized, was not capable of managing this kind of volume. And there was excessive and uncoordinated requests for data and reporting that didn't necessarily follow the same rules from the government, from different sectors, and from donors. So the solutions that we found, the solutions, the two, I guess, although the main one was really to put in place a system of mobile data collection for all of the mobile units. So to have forms that were being collected using smartphones in the field for all 10 teams that we had in the field, so 80 people. And for that all to be fed directly. So just quickly, the system that we had is every form, so we had rehabilitation, PSS, health forms. Every form was on the smartphones, and we had a data set, a dynamic data set that was available on the server, to which beneficiary info sheets were pulling data from which they were pulling. So we had like a data set with the full, basically became like our database, sort of. And then we had an info sheet in the field that people were able to like look up data if they needed to. So it was like they would have a case file with them. And so this this was really hard to put into place, and it was took a lot of months to adapt, to train, to do testing with the field teams. But once we got it into place, it meant that all of the data was instantly available in a more or less clean state. And so we were able to really move forward after that and sort of actually start doing some data management instead of just trying to actually just get the data. And then the other sort of last little solution that we found is not a little solution, but is just that we needed to invest in HR in IM. So we needed to have someone that was a focal point. So we started growing the meal team. We got an IM officer who started to be able to work on actually doing some data management. And so I just like to finish with one more slide after. So I was thinking a lot about the good enough, because like I said, I don't feel like this was always good enough in every phase. I think maybe it was the best we could do, but I think that if we had thought somewhat in advance, there could have maybe been some ways that we could have made the system better, more adaptable, which was something I think that was said yesterday, that a good enough solution is if it's able to be adapted going forward. So I think we had good enough solutions in each phase, but then it sort of was static and it couldn't be fully adapted. So for me, what I was thinking, although anyone is welcome to challenge me on this, is that in emergencies, what's good enough for IM systems is if we can rely on standardized and pre-existing tools that are adapted, that they streamline data and information from different stakeholders in an efficient way. And if they are operational, they ease and facilitate field activities by integrating data collection into operational steps, not adding additional setups. And avoiding additional workload for field teams to provide simple but timely summaries for relevant stakeholders. So that was after thinking about it a lot, this is what I was coming up with, although can it be adapted? The last thing is just to see if you guys have any thoughts going forward on what can an organization do to avoid getting caught up or becoming a victim, really, of coordination systems like this with too much information in an unorganized manner, and what can we do in the coordination system to contribute to it or to improve it, and what can we do inside our organization to protect ourselves or to make ourselves more capable of managing this in a reactive manner, in an emergency situation. And then more practically, on a very specific note, what approach should we have to deal with backlogged data? When we have this kind of situation, which I think can arise a lot, what should we do? There we go. Thank you.
I do have a question actually, Caroline. How many weeks of sleep did you need after your mission? Probably a lot. Anyway, thank you for the very different light that was brought up in this presentation, because we can see through your input that as much as a lack, an absence of data might be a paralyzing thing for the organization to accomplish their mandate in the early stages of a crisis, then if the balance of data is inverted and then falls into the excess of data, being in terms of quantity or in terms of complexity, then we also do have an issue on our hands. And thanks also for the questions pointed at the end, because I think they are quite interesting, especially the duality that what's happening inside an organization will be naturally reflected between the organizations also. And if there is work to do on structuration of data inside the house, then we also need to structure it between ourselves, between all the partners. And I think that was a little bit also the role of Roxana's input in a few months and weeks later after your passage. And without waiting, if we want to keep a few minutes for discussion after, I will hand the mic to Roxana to explain a little bit the structuration mission she did for MSF as support.
Hi everyone. So yeah, I'm Roxana, and I'm a database officer at CartONG. So my definition of good enough would be, of course, linked to my profile. So I'm gonna start with this image, that we love very much within CartONG, and I think it should be printed and posted in every organization. Someone that offers to help the two people, and they say, no thanks, we are too busy. And I think it's very specific to the humanitarian world, and especially for the emergency phases of a mission. So my definition and my experience that I have until now is that good enough, it means both operational and structured information. And of course, this good enough, I mean, as it is the title of this conference, is different in function of the context and in function of the scale of the emergency and the phase of the emergency. But however, we already heard yesterday that good enough doesn't mean doesn't have to mean something of bad quality, because working in the humanitarian sector, we have a responsibility for this good enough, because at the end of the day, our decision affects the beneficiary, which is a refugee, an IDP, or a patient. So I think that what is important in working with data in an emergency phase and in a humanitarian intervention is having in mind these three questions. First of all, what do I want to achieve? Then what products do I need? And what data do I need? So for instance, let's say, what do I want to achieve? Well, I want to have functional camp infrastructure, including water points, sanitation, shower, and so on. What products do I need? Well, I need maps with the updated number of the facilities and the updated status. And then what data do I need? Well, for creating these maps that will help me to achieve the result I want, I would need data about the camp facilities. And I think that no matter what's the phase of the mission, these three questions can be addressed. And of course, the answer may evolve in function of the phase of the mission. But no way we should start with this question: what data do I need? And I think this is This is maybe the bigger mistake in the emergency phases because we start with the data. Let's collect a lot of data. We don't know exactly what we're gonna do with it, and we don't really have a clear idea what fields do we need, what domains and stuff like this. And then there's a lot of time consumed for cleaning this data and taking useful outputs. So, as Kathleen already mentioned, there are coordination challenges especially in Bangladesh, and this, of course, is due because there are a lot of NGOs. I think more than 300 NGOs are present in the field. But of course, I want to address the communication issues. But also the challenges in coordination are linked to the data structuration, and especially I'm referring to the GIS data. And because I was deployed for MSF France, I will talk about how MSF tries in the field to address these challenges. So for the communication, currently it doesn't have an active role as a data provider for the GIS data, but I can talk about the data structuration and the fact that MSF is doing efforts in structuring its data and improve the quality of the collected data. And why MSF is interested in having this data structuration, as Simon already mentioned, there are several MSF sections present in the field, but in the Kutupalong extension area, there is especially MSF-OCA in orange and MSF-OCP. And they are, you can see the borders. This map shows the importance of having a common approach in data collection and in spatial analysis and in map production and so on. Because if you want to develop, for instance, the Watson infrastructure, if MSF France wants to deploy this, for instance, I'm talking about the Camp 17, which is in the north, he cannot stop at the border. He must collaborate with MSF Holland, which is in Camp 4 and Camp 5. So this is why MSF, especially started with January, had this commitment to improve the data that has been collected in the emergency phase. And here is a useful example why MSF needs this structured data. So here is the Camp 20, and the discussion was I think in April, to open a new mobile clinic. And here you can see in the left side the data that comes from the MSF data collection from the GPS guys that we have in the field. And on the right side is the data for the same camp coming from a data provider in the area. So Simon was asking how to manage between collecting data and waiting for the data, because maybe there are some partners in the field that are already collecting data. So is there a need for us to put effort in collecting again the same data? So at least for MSF, the answer was yes, because the GIS flyings in the field, they compared the existing data, as I said, provided by other data providers and what our collectors are collecting in the field. And you can see that, so we have here the water points. So there are quite big differences in terms of location and also in terms of status, because on the left side you can see also a circle that indicates whether it's green, it's a working water point, whether it's yellow, it needs some maintenance and so on. So based on this accurate data collected, the GIS team there was able to come with a final product, with a map, to serve, in fact, the initial purpose, the initial demand of where should we place a new mobile clinic. So based on an accurate data collection, we could have a decision, help the decision making, and here is the mobile clinic that was opened in the Camp 20. Okay, so why the need of this of having a good data collection mechanism? So the need came from the field, especially from the GIS specialists and the data collectors. They needed a system that, as you can see, allows them to collect data, to update the collected data, to delete, do the quality control, and so on. But then the needs evolved. So we had the other teams, like the surveillance, the logistics, even the construction team, that they were interested. Hey, can you show us the last drone imagery, because you want to see how the hospital that we are that we are planning to build, how is it now and how it will be in the next months. Then the logistics were interested in using the GIS data for the road access and other facilities. So this was for the field side in Nokia, and the functionalities that they wanted to have from this system. Then also there was the coordination team in Coxs Bazar who was interested in having an overview of the MSF activities in the camps, and of course the HQ, as I said, MSF Holland, Paris, and the GIS unit in Geneva. So having all these requests from the field coordination and HQ, we were faced with this challenge of changing the quick and dirty system, let's say, that was put in place at the beginning with a new system that allows to have a standardized database model that is fed by the mobile data collection of MSF. It's also fed by external data sources, like the work that is done by Missing Maps through Mapatons for the shelter footprints, and also data available on HDX and Open Aerial Map. And putting in place this system, we could both be operational, because the GIS officers could still producing printed maps in the desktop GIS, but we also could develop a web geo app accessible through a browser and through internet to all these sections, field coordination and HQ. So you don't have to be a GIS professional to interact with the data, to make zoom in, zoom out, to export your map, and so on. And so here is the timeline for the deploying. As I said, I also was deployed for MSF France. So Simon was the GIS Flying 1. And then starting with the GIS Flying 2, end of December, end of February, we started to improve the way we are collecting data and the database structure. And then my mission as GIS Flying 3 was really to standardize this database model based on what my colleagues have done before, but also based on the CartONG expertise, because we are working with other partners like UNHCR, so not just with MSF, so we could come with our expertise in terms of data management. And then after my mission, the next flyings continued to implement the proposals and to finalize the recruitment process and to stabilize the GIS position with the GIS national staff. So coming back to almost to the end of the presentation, of course you already know this this code, garbage in, garbage out. So your analysis is only as good as your data. And as I said, as you are working in the humanitarian sector, we have to really be responsible of, over this good enough notion. Here is the different data sources that we integrated in our databases, so not just the data collected by the MSF workers. And I think, because the subject here is not perfection in emergency, is good enough, but I think somehow perfection is hidden in this concept. Because in certain phase, the good enough becomes perfection for that phase. So for instance, in red here, we have the shelter's footprints that were extracted with automatic extraction. So at the beginning of the crisis, it was, whoa, it's perfect. We have the shelter footprints, even though it's not in real like in the field, but at that moment was perfect. For the next phase of the mission, that perfection didn't count that much. So we need more accurate data. So that perfection became like a good enough. So we had to look to a new version of the data. So we had this through the mapathons that were organized in Europe for sustaining the MSF mission. So I think in terms of MSF activities, it will always be this phase of quick and dirty, because MSF needs to be there where there is a need of assistance for the patient. But also there is this reflection on improving the way we are working with data, and here is the work that CartONG does in the field, depending on the actor for which it is deployed. So at the end, I like to finish with the same slide. Good enough is both operational and structured, and it must be responsible. Thank you.
Thank you, Roxana. I really like the third piece of vision you add to this panel, because as much as was addressed before, the challenge of creating when there is nothing, and then the challenge of organizing when there is too much, maybe, or too complex. Then comes also the question of analyzing and sharing, is be able to be operational, to be a proper data manager, when we call it this way, or information manager, which is always a concept we all relate to. It's at the end being able to help the people who do the actual assistance to people in need to be able to do their jobs. It's what we want to do. It's to make them able to deliver. So what I really like is that the two concepts you bring in is, first, quality of information and structuration of information does not mean every time that you need to sacrifice the operationality of it. Its ability to be delivered quickly and precisely and accurately. That's the first point I like. The second thing you bring in, which I also really appreciate, is that the definition of what is good enough and the definition of what is perfection first will depend of the interests and the relevance of the person who is manipulating the data, but also will evolve through times. And that brings me back to this opening session, which was done in this room by Sonia Carcare, who mentioned the fact that good enough is an iterative process. And that's the case here, because what was good enough at the beginning was considered then as perfect and then was changed back again. So it's quite an interesting approach, which I like very much. Thank you. As we are quite tight in time, we have a little tolerance zone, thank you, the organization team, up to 1:15. So I'd like to invite the people who have questions to one of the panelists or to the group to raise their hands and go ahead. Yes.
Thank you very much for the very interesting presentations. I have a very small question about the upload of data that you've been collected to OSM. Especially, I'm interested when the first speaker was talking about MSF, that MSF collected boundaries data. Did you upload it later to OSM? Because I think if the data is uploaded to OSM, then it becomes much easier to kind of maintain it and make sure that, yeah, it will be relevant, because you have such a big community of volunteers. Thank you.
So from my side, no, because it was so dirty. But maybe after, I don't know. Really?
Yeah, as I said, unfortunately for the moment, MSF doesn't position itself as a official data provider. So up to now, we just uploaded the health facilities points. As a reference, the camp boundaries and the subblocks are those used by that are available on the AGX portal, on the Humanitarian Data Exchange, and they're uploaded by UNHCR. I know that MSF still updates the subblocks boundaries, but it's like keep internally to MSF. But the camps boundary they are available already on the Humanitarian Data Exchange.
Thank you. I also wanted to highlight, I learned a lot during the presentation, and I have two questions. The first one is related to the time you needed for the first mapping of the boundaries MSF conducted. And a sub-question related to this one, did MSF, Handicap International, or any other stakeholder use drones? Because mapping by drones is very fast, and we have very accurate data currently with the software using. My second question is related to your point, I don't remember your name from Handicap, when you said, I'm a bit surprised because you're starting presentation saying Handicap was in a country since '97, and oh, suddenly we need a database. So my question was no prior M&E system in place? And the second one, I very like your conclusion, I totally agree with you. We need a standardized pre-existing system to be flexible enough, standardized enough to be adaptable to all contexts, but at the same time flexible enough to be adapted to specific contexts. My question is, since then, did Handicap start at that headquarter level to think developing this standardized system? Thank you.
Hello. Why do I have problems every time? Thank you. Sorry. Thanks. Let's see. So, in all honesty, thank you for your question. In all honesty, I was pretty surprised too. So, it's not that there was no database. There was. It's just that it was managed in a way that was manageable for like a long-term, low volume activities. Since then, and even before, but the experience in Bangladesh was definitely a big push. But it's something that we've known and have been trying to work on for a while, is definitely to work on developing a survey bank and sort of, not just a survey bank, but a strategy of a standardized tool that will be able to be deployed in emergencies. It's one of the things that we're definitely working on, and some tools have been already developed for some basic information, but we're still working on deploying them. But it's definitely something that's under reflection. Thank you.
About the drone, MSF sometimes use drone in their mission, but for this case, at the beginning, it was really difficult to obtain some authorization to use the drone. So IOM managed some partner to get this imagery and all the data they need, but not much.
Walking around with GPS, and so taking ground control points, and then on that basis you define your boundaries. But how long did it take from the start training of people, conducting the survey, and then processing the data?
To have the first real boundaries, it was just 3 days. But the first result is really dirty. It's just a polygon with itinerary tracks. And if you have already recorded the tracks, you can know sometimes GPS record a point, but it's not timed in the good way, and you have a polygon in how you can see the holes. Yeah. So.
If I may just complete just to ask a precision about the question, was your question specifically about the boundaries themselves or the mapping of the camp as a whole?
No, my question was really related to the time consuming of this ground approach to mapping, given that this small tool called the drone can do it in half an hour nowadays. And
sorry. On this, I will simply take over from Simon because we actually work together. He ended up being panelist and me, the facilitator. But you have to see that the mapping done by MSF was done in 2 phases. The first one was what we call base mapping, and then it comes to physical element, let's say, on the camp, something which is visible from the sky. That phase, you're right, took a long time. It took a month, actually, before Simon's mission. It was done manually, on the ground, on the foot. At that time, complex situation in the camp, very difficult access, end of rainy season. However, at that time, IOM did not unlock yet the access to drone imagery, and at the end of the rainy season, we were also blocked by the fact that the sky was completely cloudy. So it's not that the only option was going to foot, but it was the good enough one, let's say. So the base mapping took a month. Then when it came to Simon's mission, the question was how to map the boundaries, because at that moment we noticed that the actual groups, social groups in the camps, the one that deserves to be called a block or a MAGI unit, did not always match the visual delimitations you could see from the sky on an imagery, because that would also depend on the way the population arriving by groups, coherent, by the same origin or by the same families, were able to kind of sit together. And then since you sometimes have rivers or hills in the middle, visually they look like completely different clusters, but in reality it's one block, one authority, and one social coherence in a way. And that was extremely hard to map on satellite imagery because it was misleading instead of being a gain of time, hence the data collection made directly by Simon on the ground.
Last question, maybe.
Laurent, my question relates to the tension that can exist between the data needs that I agree with Roxana, you have to define after precisely and not just collect data randomly and then see what you have to do with after. And the necessity for standardization that you mentioned, Carolyn. What would you define as a good enough standardization for an emergency response, considering that we all agree that the conditions and the context are always varying? Do you have some input? I'm not expecting a full answer. It's a question that I had to face when I used to work for the Red Cross before. Don't have an answer myself. Thank you.
Thank you. I think it's one of the biggest challenges, definitely, in developing any sort of standardized tool, is to walk the line between what we're always talking about agility and standardization. So I guess, honestly, I think it depends on each activity, but in a lot of cases we can sort of know, like for handicap, we will know what kind of activities would we do in emergency. We know what our expertise is. We know what we're going to do in the field on arrival. So we can concentrate on those activities and sort of develop what is going to be the common thread that we would always need. Like, which data points are we sure we would always need? What is the workflow that we're going to try to always have as like a base to put into place? And then afterwards, I think the most important is to leave open the options. Like, know where are you leaving open options for flexibility. Sort of identifying what is the common thread, and then where are the options open. I don't know if you guys want to jump in.
Perfect. Considering time, sorry?
Roxana.
Oh, sorry, Roxana, go ahead.
I wanted to say that I think for MSF it was like the biggest mission of camp mapping. So we managed to have a structured database model for the camp mapping that now we are using it in other countries. So we are starting with this model, and even though it will be emergency in other countries, at least for the camp mapping, we can say we are sure we'll do the things in the right way based on the experience we gain in Bangladesh.
Yes. Very last one then.
Just a thought, what came to my mind. We all know there were a lot of collateral damages on the ecosystem, agrosystem, and host population. And I want to, for me, information management is part of MNE, better said. And I'm a bit surprised because I think it's a bit dangerous the way we are looking at information data and geographical data. It's like we are modeling a 3D map where you don't see the environment in which this 3D map, beautiful map, because usually they're very sexy. It's a bit the same for me. I just want to remind that we have to take into account, because I was thinking about how could we map also where the local population was living, what kind of activities, because you started, I don't know your name, Leo? Yeah, about saying that it was a jungle. It was not a jungle. There were people living there. There were some agriculture activities and etc. And I think this is something also very important because of the sudden pressure after such an influx of refugees. And something we tend to forget. And the first day we started talking about good enough is also about do not harm. And I think we don't have to neglect this aspect while designing and thinking about what information. Because by focusing too much the scope on something specific, we lose sight on very important creating collateral damages, etc. Thank you.
And the standardization, the minimal standardization standards that were mentioned earlier could also include the context where they have to inscribe themselves, even though you need then some flexibility because you will not apply them the same way in South Sudan or in Bangladesh, but yes, that's definitely correct. Perfect. I will finish the presentation there. Thank you all for your interesting question, and thank you for the panelists for bringing all 3 pieces of vision. Thank you very much.